have a bunch of churches that are joining us online, a bunch of our students, and then our hope is that we're going to be able to develop this material further and continue to kind of grow how we can serve churches effectively. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Tim Alchin. I'm the director of the Biblical Counseling Center, and it's a joy to be able to lead the team. And just got back from Arizona last night, so I was out there all week for some pastors' conferences and other things, and so it feels a little cooler here than it was 90 in Arizona yesterday. But we're good? All righty. I think we're going to get started. I hope everybody's got notes, and you're able to hop in. But thank you for those of you who are here joining us for really how do we care like Christ for young people. And whether you're joining us online or whether you're joining us in the room, I'm just grateful that you took the time to say, you know what, it's important to care for the next generation. And I was a youth pastor for many years prior to becoming a counselor, and my heart just resonates. I have two boys myself, 19 and 21, and they're in college, and parenting doesn't end just because they turn 18, right? You continue, and that's part of why when we're looking at children and teens and young adults and premarital over the next 2 months, just asking the question, how do we give God's answers? How do we give hope to those that are in need? Now, I want you to imagine it's 9:30 on a Tuesday night. Your 14-year-old is standing in the doorway of your bedroom, and they say 6 words that change everything. I need to tell you something. What goes through your heart? Your heart rate spikes. Your mind races. Is this the worst case scenario, right? You've even rehearsed in a few scenarios in your head, and in that fraction of a second before you've said a single word, your face has already spoken. Your posture has already preached a sermon. Your child is already reading you to see whether this is a safe door to walk through or whether this was a terrible mistake. And most of us have had some version of that moment. Maybe not with your own child, maybe with a teenager in your youth group who finally opened up after months of silence. Maybe with a young couple sitting in your office whose marriage is unraveling before it even started. Maybe with a 10-year-old whose anger is so big that it fills every room that he walks into, and nobody can figure out why. And in those moments, most of us were never given a framework. We were given good theology, we were given a heart for people, but nobody sat us down and said, here is how you walk into these conversations without making them worse. Here is how you slow down long enough to actually reach the heart. That is what today is about. It's not about a formula. It's not about a script. It's a posture, one that takes people's, children's and young people's souls seriously. Seriously enough to prepare before we speak, to listen before we fix, to ask before we tell, and to plan before we send them back out the door. So what we want to do today is give you a simple framework, a biblical framework, so that you can care for young people. You can care for children, you can care for teens, you can care for young adults. You might be able to care for those who are walking towards marriage. And so there's an acrostic that we're going to be working through in all of our workshops today, and it's plan. What do we do? What do we need if we're going to be effective in reaching young people? And we really need a plan. And so the acrostic just is PLAN, and the P stands for prepare. And we're going to talk about how do you prepare for a conversation. If you're going to have a plan to care for young people, you're going to have to prepare. You're going to have to be prepared. How do you prepare yourself for an effective conversation? Listen. How do you listen effectively? What do you listen for? How do you communicate your heart and your theology even through the way that you listen to people? The way you listen matters deeply. Ask. We're going to look at a heart question ladder, which takes us from behaviors into worship. We're going to see that God cares about every aspect of life. And so we're going to learn how to ask good questions. How do we walk alongside young people to help them learn how to be discerning? To help them to learn how to figure out what God wants for them in their life. And in the end is next steps. How do we give concrete and measurable and appropriate next steps to young people? And so in the children's track today, we're going to be walking through anxiety and anger. We're going to be walking through abuse and trauma, and we're going to be walking through conflict. In the young adult track, we're going to be looking at making decisions. We're going to be looking at anxiety. We're going to be looking at how do you guide young people through addictions. And so we're going to be looking at some of the common topics that young adults face. And so if you've got your notes, you should have gotten the plan packet, and I hope you're ready to dive in. Proverbs 20, verse 5 says this: "The purposes of a person's heart are deep waters, but one who has insight draws them out." What's our goal? Our goal is to learn how to draw out young people, to draw them out and to help them understand that God ultimately cares about and sees the heart most. And God cares about their heart, and we care about their heart. And so we want to draw that out. So P stands for prepare. Prepare. When we think about prepare, here's the way that I mean it. That we're going to prepare ourselves in 4 kind of unique ways. The first thing is this: before you ever open your mouth, before you sit down with a child or teenager, there's work to do. And most of it happens inside of you before you ever enter the room to have the conversation. You as a caregiver, you as a parent, some of you are parents and some of you are caregivers, some of you are youth workers, some of you are pastors in different roles and responsibilities. Some people watching online are counselors. But you need to prepare yourself before you even enter the room. You cannot lead someone well if your own heart is reactive. And preparation begins vertically. So the first way we're going to prepare ourselves is we're going to prepare ourselves spiritually. We're going to pray first, not as a formality, but we're going to pray and ask for God's help and wisdom in reaching the heart of a young person. You're going to reach your kids on your knees as much as you're going to reach them with your conversations. You're going to prepare your heart. And so pray first. Second thing is examine yourself. Before you address your child's heart, examine your own. You think about a parent who's in this position of wanting to reach the heart of their child. Am I embarrassed? Am I afraid? Am I trying to control the outcome? Am I more concerned about my reputation than restoration? Right? So God's calling each parent to examine themselves. What is my contribution to the problem? Now, if you're a youth worker, right? Examination might come in a different way, but all of us, we're going to examine ourselves. We're going to manage our own emotions. Children and teenagers borrow the emotional tone of parents and those that are caregiving for them. And if you're alarmed, they feel alarmed. And we make a lot about, you'll see a lot in children's literature and teenage counseling literature about the word regulation. Well, what's regulation? It's really self-controlled expressions of emotions. It's recognizing that God speaks into our emotions. God shapes our emotions. And so there's this self-controlled processing of our emotions with God, with our spouse, or with a trusted colleague so they don't spill out onto the child. It's self-controlled expressions of emotions. So if you enter a conversation anxious, angry, or ego-driven, what will happen? You'll either freeze or overreact. But prayer calms our leadership. It does not make you passive. It makes you grounded. So I want you to think about this. Think about a hard conversation you've had with a child or teenager that didn't go well. What was happening in your own heart before you walked in? What would preparing differently have changed? So God calls us to prepare our own heart spiritually. You can write that down later in your notes. But the second way that we prepare is we prepare the relationship, relational readiness. Relational capital determines how much truth someone can receive. Young people do not care how much you know until they know how much you care. They don't care that I have a doctorate when I counsel with young people. It is absolutely irrelevant to them, right? In fact, it probably scares them more than it helps, right? I'm talking to a doctor. I don't like going to doctors. But the reality is, like, you got to be able to get onto their level, prepare the relationship. Now, it's hard in a formal counseling room. This is one of the reasons why I love church-based counseling, and I love families that are caring for young people, is that you already are building into that relationship. You have an advantage over the local children's psychologist because you know them. You care about them. You can pour into the relationship. So pursue before there's a problem. Play with your kids, not just supervise them. Check in with teenagers about their world, not just their behavior. Have coffee with young adults, right? Invest in couples early. So pursue before there's a crisis. Typically, we end up helping young people in crisis because they come after the crisis, right? And what if we pursued as a church sooner? We invested in relationships sooner. And so, not all kids mature at the same speed, so we need to know their world. You look down there, I gave kind of some of the differences between children, teens, young adults, and premarital. There's concrete thinkers that are children, and they need clear, simple, consistent truth. What do teens need? Identity-forming, peer-driven. They're asking, who am I? Do I matter? Young adults, they're seeking to develop their own independence, right? They want to be able to do it themselves. Testing what they truly believe. Premarital, they have expectations that are heavy, blind spots that are plentiful and consequential. You think about the young woman who thinks that she can change her hothead boyfriend just because she gets married to him. And the reality is the gray heads in the room always go like this whenever I give that illustration. Because they know that just because you get married doesn't make you better. Often increases pressure. And we need to walk alongside young people through every season of life. Preparing your understanding, issue readiness. You cannot guide what you do not understand. Preparation means studying the common mindsets, knowing the biblical foundations, and anticipating the distortions behind the presenting issues. So if you're going to be ready to have a conversation that matters with kids, you're going to have to take the time to study. You're going to have to take the time to study the issues they're going through. You think about a young woman who's dealing with anxiety. Now, most people in the church have a simplistic, don't be anxious kind of mindset. The reality is that there's so many different things that we can put on. There's so many different ways that we can renew the mind when it comes to anxiety. And do I understand that how fear works in the heart of a child? Can you distinguish between immaturity and rebellion? A child who's fearful because they don't have any experience versus a child who's fearful because they have experienced something, right? They're going to come at it from a different perspective. Do I know which biblical truths speak to fear? Or a teenage boy struggling with pornography? And do I understand the cycles? And do I understand how this plays into temptation? So preparation prevents shallow responses. Surface level preparation produces surface level help. One of the things we're going to be working through today as we think about preparing is some of the common issues, right? Anger, anxiety, addiction, decision-making. Now, why? Because as adults, we need to be prepared to guide. We need to be able to think through beyond shallow answers, which would only produce surface-level help. The last one is just prepare the way. It's called environmental readiness, choosing the right time. Don't try to correct kids when they're exhausted or they just walked in the door, right? Choose the right place, private, comfortable, free from interruption, removing distractions, phones down, siblings elsewhere, enough time to finish, and lowering defensiveness side by side. It's often confrontational rather than face-to-face. So, do we take the time to prepare the way for effective conversations? And if you go into many children's counseling offices, you'll recognize that they have toys and they have other things. Well, why? Because they are recognizing that what causes a child to put down their defensiveness and engage, right? Well, in the same way, what works for children might be different than what works for teens than what works for young adults. But we need to be able to have a way and a place to care for them. Now, you're going to see on the next page, on page 4 on your notes, just top 5 tips for preparing well. We're not going to go through this whole thing. I'm giving you more today than we're going to be able to go through line by line, okay? And so I'm just going to warn you that we're going to be skipping some parts and you're going to have to go back and read some of it. But when you see the top 5 tips in the notes, We're talking particularly for those of you who are doing counseling with kids. And some of you are like, well, I don't do counseling with kids. I'm here just to help my own kids, right? Like, the only counseling I'm doing is in my child's bedroom when I'm doing correction or, when I'm yelling at my kid, right? But I recognize there's some people who are joining today who are working in church-based counseling ministries and who are trying to work with families. And so one of the things we often say when you're working with families and when you're working with children is that it's really important that you work with parents too, right? And so I can tell you as a counselor, when I'm working with kids and I have a child who's under the age of 12, like we sit in a whole session together, right? Now, that's really instructive because parents are given the responsibility before the Lord to really raise up their child, but you also are able to see the dynamic between parent and a child, right? And you're able to see some of the excesses and some of the actions and reactions and responses that are going on. You're able to see those even real time in your office or in the place where you meet with people. But we're gonna think through just some of the ways, if you are counseling kids, what are some of the ways you might prepare well, okay? So the first thing is, I would just say, it's clarify your role before entering the room. Like, are you here as a guide or as a coach or as a co-laborer or a confronter? Or are you just a caring friend? The posture you're going to take is going to be different in each of those. Whether you're more formal in a meeting or whether you are just talking with another mom that you care about what's going on with her child and what's going on in the struggles they're having in their home. But to kind of know your role. And you don't want to be seen as the position of, well, I'm grading or I'm evaluating another parent. Clarify your role. Anticipate their fear, not just their problem. The reality is this, that most of the time when you are talking with a kid who's going through a crisis, or you're talking with a kid, it's coming off of a crisis, right? Coming off some sort of moment, some sort of flashpoint where a parent said, okay, I need someone to help. Sometimes you are the caregiver, you're the youth worker, and you are simply noticing a behavior in a child, and you are coming alongside them. But parents rarely arrive as neutral parties. They come carrying shame and fear, right? They're embarrassed. So my kid did, right? My kid got in trouble for this. I'm sitting in the principal's office, sitting in the youth pastor's office, right? Sitting in the police station. Another parent called me up and said, do you know what your kid did in Sunday school this morning? And now all of a sudden it's like, well, I've got an issue I'm dealing with. And there's fear there, right? There's grief there. Oftentimes all four at once. And so a counselor or leader who's thought about the parent's emotional reality before the meeting lands very differently than those who dive straight into the presenting issue. So separate the child's issue from the parent's issue, but hold both actions and responses. Hold both. Here's what I mean by that. That in every home, there's actions and responses. So in every conversation with a child, there's a child's issue, but there's also a parent's issue, a parent's response running side by side. So when you're working with a kid in counseling, you're also working with a parent, even if the parent isn't willing to listen to you. Okay? Because you're working with the actions and responses of the whole family group that works together. And so some parents will be annoyed or upset that you're pointing out that the behavior doesn't fall far from the tree, right? That the anxious behavior of the mother has bled over into the anxious behavior of the daughter, right? That the angry demeanor of the father has led to a situation where there's volatility in the home, right? And so we want to recognize that there's going to be both actions and responses. If you only address the child's behavior, you leave the parent's contribution unexamined. If you only address the parent, they feel blamed. Do you get that? If you only address the parent, they feel blamed. They want help. And they want help for more than their own problem. But they need to own their own problem, right? And children need to own their own problem. And so preparation means thinking through both tracks in advance and holding them with grace and honesty. Fourth is just come with questions, not just answers. Think through questions you want to ask. Have a relational curiosity. What was it like in their home growing up? I was talking with a dad recently who was confronted by his church about harsh behavior with his home and his children. And the reality is, in this dad's eyes, because he wasn't leaving bruises, he wasn't that bad. Because his dad left bruises. His dad would give him a bloody nose. That's what he experienced growing up. And so now all of a sudden he's like, I'm not that bad. Yet people in the church had seen him and said, this doesn't look good. This doesn't look healthy, right? You're harsh. You grab your son and you look angry. Now, he didn't recognize it because the intensity with which he grew up didn't even match the intensity in his own home, right? Yet, it still was an alarming level of intensity to many who observed him. Now, you see how that comparison game creates, right? Now, had I not been willing to take the time to kind of draw him out about what happened in his home growing up, I wouldn't have understood how that thought process worked. And it's been a process even getting him to own, okay? You've dialed it back from 9 to 7, but let's dial the intensity down to a 2, okay? Let's rarely raise that intensity level to where people around you and your neighbors are alarmed at what's going on in your yard. Fathers, don't exasperate your children. That's what Ephesians says. The reality is living your life at a 7 exasperates your children, right? Living your life at a 9 hurts your children, right? Destroys relationships. You raise kids who don't want to talk to you anymore. And so what we're doing in helping parents is helping them to gain perspective. So come with questions, not just with answers. Prepare for resistance and decide ahead of time how you receive it. The same father was resistant to answer questions because he was afraid that people would label him an abuser. Now, the reality is that he wasn't an abuser, but his intensity was too high sometimes. His anger was out of control at times. And because of that, people had taken notice. Now, by God's grace, his wife would say, he's a different man now. He's changing. He's growing. What does it take, though? It takes godly people coming around and giving him wisdom and perspective. So preparing for the conversation. All right, so that's P. Top 5 tips for preparing well. You need to prepare. If you're going to have a plan to help young people, you need to prepare. The L is listen. Listen before you speak. To answer before listening, that is a folly and shame, Proverbs 18:13 says. Listening is not passive. It's one of the hardest and most spiritually demanding things that we do. Most of us are preparing our response while the other person is still speaking. And genuine listening requires that we suspend that reflex. How do we do this? How do you grow in being an effective listener of your own children, or an effective listener of teenagers, or an effective listener to young adults? How do you serve young people by choosing to listen to them? And so I was recently counseling with a mother who kept correcting her young son's answers the entire session. She kept interrupting him, and she would correct minor details. Now, how do you think the son responded to that kind of correction? He got really frustrated. He shut down, right? She wasn't willing to take the time to listen to him and to draw him out. We're going to look for repeated patterns, not isolated incidents. Now imagine that you find out that your child went to school and didn't complete their homework. You get a note home, hey, Johnny didn't complete their homework. Well, Johnny last night said, hey, do you have your homework done? Yeah, got it done, all done. All right? You trust him as a parent? He goes to school. You know, that was kind of my MO in middle school, right? Oh, it's all done, right? And somehow I lost it before the next morning, right? I had it done, but then I lost it, right? And so then you compound the lie, okay? Sorry, Mom, okay? Some of those were lies. I now will admit it. But now that's different. Suppose you go to the first quarter report card and you're like, hey, Johnny hasn't turned in a single assignment all year long. He hasn't done any of his homework. Well, there's a difference between an isolated incident and a pattern, right? It's possible that, you know what, there was a ball game on or a friend's birthday party, and he's like, yeah, I got it done, right? Because I just want to go. But it's not a pattern of lying. But you're looking for repeated patterns, not isolated incidences. A single incident is data. A pattern is a diagnosis. Before drawing conclusions, ask, have I seen this before? Is this a season or is this an episode? So we're looking for, as we're listening, for repeated patterns. We want to notice the emotions underneath. Behavior is what's on the surface, but emotion is what lies underneath it. And beneath the emotion is worship. Our emotions reveal what we love, what we desire. What you get angry at reflects what you love. What you're afraid of reflects what you love. Our emotions reflect what we worship. And so ultimately, we want to get below the surface to what the heart is trusting, fearing, or craving. Defiance often covers fear. I'm afraid, so I just refuse. Just dig my heels in. But the reality is, it's not really defiance, it's fear. I'm afraid I'm going to fail. Withdrawal often covers shame. Kids who are abused take on the shame of their abusers. And what do? What happens when people experience shame? Well, they go into hiding. They do. An addict who experiences shame goes into hiding. They walk in darkness, not light. Now, why do they walk in darkness? Because it covers. Right? But it destroys at the same time. So withdrawal often covers shame. Anger often covers loneliness or grief. Perfectionism often covers this terror of inadequacy. Again, another fear-based response. So as we listen, we want to begin to notice the emotions underneath. What is being revealed? Creating safety with a calm tone and a patient posture. Your tone communicates your theology before you ever open the Bible. Sometimes there's volatility even in a counseling office, right? Where people get into disagreements. But your tone, the calm tone, a patient posture, one that trusts God with them. So when a child watches how you respond to their confession, their anger, their silence, their deflection, they are not just observing your technique. They are forming a picture of what God is like. Does God keep his face towards us in our confession, or does God run from us because he's embarrassed of us? Well, you think about the prodigal son, right? And the father out in the yard looking for his son who had no doubt shamed and embarrassed him. And he sees him and he runs to him, right? He runs towards the one who had hurt him. And so our tone, our posture communicates. A reactive adult communicates a reactive God. An impatient adult communicates an impatient God. An angry adult communicates an angry God. But a calm, steady, unhurried presence says what the child desperately needs to hear. You are not too much for me. I am not going anywhere. God is not done with you. So this is not a therapeutic technique. This is incarnational ministry, caring like Christ. So what does this look like in practice? Well, keep your voice lower than feels natural. Say less than you want to. A quiet tell me more often draws out more than a rush of correction or reassurance. Put down whatever's in your hands. Let your face be soft and open. When your calm gets tested, some children, especially those from high conflict homes, will act out. They'll react. They'll create a scenario that derails conversations because conversations that go on too long just go off the rails anyway. They'd rather be done. And you remaining calm when adults stay regulated. The question is, will adults stay regulated when I am not? So, I want you to look down at the bottom here. What does this include? It includes facing towards them, not angled away, putting down or closing anything in your hands, allowing your face to be soft and open, not finishing their sentence or filling pauses prematurely, staying seated when they expect you to stand up and take control. So these are opportunities, right? They're opportunities for us to communicate our heart. We want to hear, we want to listen. We want to communicate love in the way that we care for young people. Now, look at, again, some of the tips here, top 5 tips for listening well. And again, these are going to apply mostly to kind of formal counseling conversations, right? So contextualize them into your own family as you see fit. But the first thing is I just would give a tip if you're listening, is get physically low. Right? If you go into counselors' offices that work often with kids, you're going to see toy boxes and other things on the floor, right? But you often might go into a counselor's office, and sometimes if I'm working with a kid, you're going to see me sitting on the floor. Not even sitting in a chair. Now, why is that? Because you can get eye to eye, right? You can get yourself low, right? It can be intimidating to talk to an adult, right? So eye level changes everything. When you crouch down, sit on the floor, or pull a chair close rather than sitting across from a desk or across a room, right? Listen for what's not being said. You think of a situation where, you have a young person who's like, well, I hate my mom's boyfriend. That's an alarming statement to a counselor, right? Like, I just don't like him. He's not a good guy. And you might take note of that, right? But the reality is that somebody probably isn't going to open up with what that's about on the first time you talk to them. But that should be a really alarming thing, right? Because that's the exact scenario where a lot of girls face horrific abuse. And I've had that same exact scenario as a youth pastor. I've had that scenario where it takes quite a while for people to open up. Now, I think about how many men in their 40s and 50s I've had in my office confess to being sexually abused for the first time. They were in their often, before 10 or teenage years when they got abused. And for 30 years, they didn't talk about it. Happens far too frequently. And the reality is that we need to create safe places where kids can talk about what's going on. You think about that young girl, it's like my mom's boyfriend's terrible, right? Now, what does she know? She knows that her mom's boyfriend shows up with groceries. She's getting fed from him. If I say anything, how are we going to eat? She's trapped. She's torn. She doesn't know what to say. I'm just going to take it. But what happens? She becomes more withdrawn. She becomes more angry. So again, listen for what's not being said. It's not always something horrific like abuse, right? But listen. Listen carefully. Sometimes what isn't said is more powerful than even what is. Take note of that. Resist the urge to fix mid-story. This moment you pivot to a solution, a correction, or a scripture, the child registers that you've stopped listening to them. Now you're telling them what to do. Let them get their word. Let them get their story out. Let them talk. Draw them out. Reflect emotion before you reflect truth. It sounds like that felt really unfair. That must have been really scary. Giving kids a language, an emotion that they can describe how they're feeling allows you to go to Scripture later. It allows you with insight, right? If a child agrees, okay, I was afraid. I was feeling embarrassed. I was feeling ashamed. I was feeling really sad. I was angry. You ultimately pivot towards the gospel. We're going to see that in the next section. So reflect emotion before you reflect truth. And last is just stay curious longer than feels comfortable. Most of us move to application too fast because sitting with a child's pain or confusion feels less unproductive. We feel less productive listening than we do talking. As counselors, as helpers, as parents. But I would tell you, it's not unproductive to take the time to listen. If one thing I could tell those who are working with kids and young people is slow down. Take the time to listen. before you correct. We move to application too fast. Listening itself is a form of love. So when we're speaking the truth in love, speaking the truth in the context of a relationship where I know that I've been heard, where I've been listened to, amplifies the love that you're able to speak. And so it's important that we know that we take the time to listen. God is patient enough to meet them where they're at. Stay in the questions one beat longer than your instinct tells you to. All righty, so that's P and the L. So prepare and listen. The A is ask. And we're going to look at a tool, the Heart Question Ladder. And Paul Tripp and a couple other counselors developed kind of this concept, and we're going to personalize it for kids. But the Heart Question Ladder is a way that we can ask questions in a systematic way, so we can have a plan, but we're able to move towards the behavior, towards the heart. And I hope you're able to see that as we walk through this. So every adult in this room has probably delivered a correction that landed perfectly and changed nothing. You told your kid exactly what they needed to hear, and they didn't care. Does that ever happen to anyone else besides me? Right? It's happened quite a bit, right, as a parent. Right? You told them what they needed to know, and they're like, so what? Right? I'm going to do what I want to do. Right? And so we've all done that. The behavior stopped for a while, and the heart stayed exactly where it was. That is the ceiling of behavior-based intervention, and it's a low ceiling. But the gospel promises something better, not reformed conduct, but renewed worship. Psalm 139:23 says this, "Search me, O God, and know my heart." So how do we help young people to know their heart? What does Jesus say about the heart? Above all else, guard your heart, for from it flow the issues of life, right? Out of the abundance of the heart, man speaks. Every word, every action, every thought flows through our heart. And so Jesus was reaching hearts. In fact, he criticized those whose behavior on the outside looked impressive. But on the inside, he said, you're whitewashed tombstones. Right? You're dead on the inside. You're nice and pretty on the outside. He's like, your heart is dead. And so what do we want to do? We want to help people to learn, young people to learn how to know their heart. So let's think about some of the reasons why we would ask questions. The first is I would just tell you that asking questions reduces defensiveness. When you point out something and you tell a child, you need to change this, versus helping them discover what they need to change, you're going to get a whole different posture, a whole different defensiveness. And so the child feels heard, not interrogated. It builds ownership. The child connects choices to consequences. Now, why is that important? Because as we're discipling kids, what do we want them to do? We want them to own their own faith, right? And so we're asking them questions that help them to determine and measure their own faith. We're training their conscience, developing the habit of self-examination. So we want them to be able to have a conscience that is responsive to what God wants. And in order for them to have that, what do they have to have? They have to have the truth of God's word. They have to have the truth of wise perspective in their mind, right? And so we want to help them train their conscience so that they can hear the voice of the Spirit pricking their conscience when they're about to sin. Expose ruling desires. Surface what the heart is actually serving. So we want to expose ruling desires. And last is we want to prepare for gospel hope. A child who sees that the need is ready, who sees their need is ready to hear the answer, right? So if we rush to correction, we create moralism. If we slow down and ask, we cultivate transformation. So the 7-step heart ladder is from really Psalm 139. And Psalm 139 does not picture God correcting David from a distance. It pictures God searching him, knowing him, pursuing him into the depths of his own heart. And that's the model we're working from. A deeper question is the one God himself asks: what is happening in your heart? And so one of the things that we're going to just be working through in all of the workshops today is we're going to be working through this heart ladder as it relates to the common issues that kids and young adults struggle with. And so we want to make sure that this heart ladder, or that these questions are things you understand, you're able to use in all the common situations that young people are dealing with. So the first one is just simply this. We're going to start with what happened. Reconstructing the moment. We need to know what happened. What is the situation that brought kids into crisis? Now, the reality is the parents and kids are going to have a different explanation sometimes as to what happened, right? I didn't do anything wrong, right? Versus, they have not been turning in any of their homework, right? Well, it was all optional, I thought, right? I thought all the homework was optional, right? And only if your parents told you had to do it, right? And but what was going on? Who was there? What happened next? So starting with just the basic facts, what happened? The second is, what did you feel? Name the emotion. Children who can name emotions can learn to shepherd them. How were you feeling? What felt the strongest? Where did you feel it? What did you do? Connecting heart to action. It builds ownership without building shame. We're going to look at a scenario here in a little bit that kind of explains and how these questions line up. But what did you say? What did you choose to do? So again, we're dealing on a surface level with kind of the basic facts, right? What happened? What were you feeling? Ultimately, how did what you were feeling translate into actions, right? Now, here's where it pivots towards the cross. What did you want? What did you want in that situation? Expose the desire. The behavior is not the root. The desire is the root. What were you hoping would happen? What were you afraid would happen? What felt really important to you? What was important to you in that moment? What did you value? What were you protecting? Question 5 is, what did you believe? Expose the interpretation. Behavior reveals belief. What were you believing about God in that moment? Did it feel like God was near or far? What were you believing about yourself? And I want you to understand, sometimes you're not, with conversations with kids, you're not going to get through all of these questions in a single conversation, right? But this is a framework to think through, how do we grow from, how do we work through a particular crisis or incident or difficult moment in someone's life? What do you believe? Expose the interpretation. Our behavior reveals our belief. What were you believing about God in that moment? Did it feel like God was near or far? What were you believing about yourself? Then ultimately, what happened because of it? Examine the fruit, the desire that led to action, that led to consequence. Did it bring what you were hoping for? Did it bring peace or trouble? What would trusting God look like? It's the gospel redirect, where correction becomes invitation. What does Jesus offer that your desire couldn't give you? How can we bring this to him? Now, I want us to just think about those questions in relation to a common scenario that you might face. A 10-year-old boy who maybe is in your church or in your ministry or counseling or maybe in your own home comes because he's been dealing with pretty explosive anger, right? A dad tells a boy, let's say his name's Ethan, he's 10 years old, it's time to turn off the Xbox for dinner. It's time to come to dinner. Ethan stands up, he yells, he throws the controller at the wall, he slams his bedroom door and says, "I'm not hungry. I'm not coming." Right? Parents are like, okay, that's kind of frustrating because I bought that Xbox controller, right? And you just smash your Xbox controller against the wall, right? And tomorrow you're going to be asking me for a new Xbox controller. Okay? Now what happened? talking to Ethan. Well, Dad said to turn off the Xbox. And I was just about done. My level was just about over. What did you feel? I was mad. I was frustrated. I was disappointed. I'd never beaten that level before. What did you do? I yelled. I threw the controller. Slammed the door. Well, what did you want? How do you think he answers? Well, I wanted to finish. I wanted more time. I wanted to win the game, right? It's the point of the game. Like, you play to win the game, right? Well, what do you believe? Well, my mom and dad don't even care. They don't care whether about me and my game, right? They don't care whether I win. They don't care about what I want. It's always what mom wants. We got to come eat whenever she says it's time to eat. Kids' opinions don't matter in this house. Well, what do you believe? They don't care. It's not fair. My opinion means nothing. Right? Well, what happened because of it? Well, I got in trouble and everybody was upset. Right? Got grounded. I don't have an Xbox anymore. Right? My dad took the Xbox to the GameStop and sold it. Said, if you're going to break your stuff, you're not going to have it. Right? Now I'm just bored. Just watch TV all the time. Right? Well, what trusting God look like? Well, I could have asked calmly, or I could have obeyed. Right? Well, when Ethan feels interrupted, he demands control. When control is blocked, anger becomes his weapon. The real issue is not the Xbox. It's ultimately, he's calling out for autonomy, right? Freedom. Wants to do his own thing. Now, within limits, a 10-year-old boy should have some opportunity to do their own thing, right? Now, conflict is a teaching opportunity. Now, is there a teaching opportunity here for parents and kids? Yeah. Right? Could they have come to some happy compromise? Perhaps, right? Is this a life-altering decision kind of issue? No. Whether a kid comes late to dinner? Now, could it create a problematic pattern? Yeah. Is defying your parents and breaking stuff a problematic pattern? Yeah. Is this pattern likely exposing itself in other areas of his life? Yeah. But when Ethan feels interrupted, he demands control. And so, now, what is the key scripture here? What causes quarrels and fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? Well, helping a child even understand, okay, well, parents have desires here, right? Their desires are good. Your desires were good. But ultimately, you went about it in the wrong way. Rather than asking permission, right, you chose defiance. Rather than explaining the situation and having a conversation with your words. So in this situation, you might model. What is a way that you might be able to talk to your parents about what's going on in that situation? The importance of it. You might model a conversation between parents and a child. So, again, you're coming back to, like, could you have trusted God in that moment and said, you know what, I'll have another opportunity. This isn't that important. But it felt really important in that moment, right? And so you're working with parents to help them to understand the conflict that was happening in both of their hearts and their lives. Think about Proverbs 4:23, keep your heart with all diligence, right? Think about Ephesians 4:26 and 27, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down upon your anger. Think about Galatians 5:22 and 23, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, gentleness, self-control, right? These are the concepts that begin to inform and to shape how a 10-year-old boy could respond, right? And talking those through in a way that honors and pleases God. So, when you think about with young people and the different ages. Ages 5 to 7, we're going to simplify, use fewer questions. Ages 8 to 11, you might use the full ladder. They're ready for more self-reflection than we often give them credit for. With teenagers, we might even add identity questions. Who are you becoming, and what story you're living inside of you right now? Ask with a calm curiosity, not a suspicion. If a child feels cornered, they hide. If they feel shepherded, they open. But again, the ladder gives you a general direction to be able to move from what happened to what was going on inside of you. Now, I don't want you to think of it as a legalistic, I have to ask all 7 questions every time. I want you to think of it as a process, as a framework to be able to have effective conversations with kids, right? To be able to move through what's going on in their heart and their life. So think about some of the tips for asking questions. Ask one question at a time. Children, especially younger ones, get lost in compound questions. What were you feeling? What did you want to happen? And did you think about God? Well, that becomes a really complicated question, right? There's 3 parts to that question. You got to ask kids one question at a time. And so ask one, let the answer breathe before you move to the next question. Follow their language, not yours. So when a child uses a word like weird or embarrassed or nothing, I had a young person came to my office and answered, I don't know, for 45 minutes to every question I asked. I got him to say no once. I tricked him into saying no. But he answered, I don't know, for 45 minutes. And I sat there and just tried to think of, sat there, I prayed, right? This kid had been through a lot of difficult moments in his life. Now, is it frustrating as a counselor to sit there and ask questions for 45 minutes and get, I don't know? Yeah, it is. Yet, I hope he walked out with at least an understanding that I had some relational curiosity about him. And so, follow their language, right? Now, I tried to follow with the I don't know. And the reality is he may not have been able to yet express what was the deepest hurt of his heart. How do I interpret it? How do I interpret that? When a kid says, what's wrong? Nothing. Well, I don't interpret nothing as nothing. I interpret it as, I'm not telling you yet. That's what that means. I'm not telling you. It doesn't really mean nothing. And so we follow their language, not ours. Right? You anchor the conversation in their vocabulary. Normalize before you probe. Before a heart-level question, a brief normalizing statement lowers the temperature. A lot of kids feel that way. Now, why can we say that with confidence from a biblical counseling standpoint? Because no temptation is overtaking you except which is common to man. Right? You're going through what a lot of kids go through. It's normal. Is lying about your homework developmentally normal in middle school? Yes. It's sinful, but it's normal. I pastored at a church where I probably had 500 middle school boys come through the ministry where I served. And 495 of them lied about homework. All right, the other 5 were kind of, academic, savants, right? And they just got it easy. But most of them lied about it at times. Because they found other things that were more important. And so normalize before you probe. Tolerate silence. It's okay to sit with a kid who's going through a tough time and sit in silence. Don't feel the need that you have to keep the conversation going. It can feel awkward. But sometimes sitting in the car in silence with a kid after they've shared a little bit of what's going on in their day, you didn't react to it. You just accepted them. I told mom and dad that something was going wrong and they tried to ask a few questions and I shut them down and we'll talk about it later. We can have a conversation about that at another time. Giving kids the opportunity to say, okay, come back. And with something they can hold on to. Children leave conversations with a feeling, not a theological summary. Close with something concrete, hopeful and small, a simple truth. So again, just some tips when you're asking questions. Last one is just next steps. Next steps. Give the work shape. So if we're going to be effective in giving kids a plan, we want to be able to give them some next steps they can take. And so we want to prepare well, we want to listen well, we want to ask questions, but we also want to put practices into place. Okay? So a meaningful conversation without a plan is just a meaningful conversation. Next steps give the work shape, structure, and accountability so that what happened in the room actually continues outside of it. But the right steps depend entirely on who's in the room and what role they play in the child's life. A counselor, a parent, and a youth worker all share the same mission, but they do not hold the same authority or access. Same mission, different roles. Adjust your method to your level of authority. So the goal of Next Steps is not just to stop a behavior. It's to move a child's heart towards trusting God in a greater way. And so everything we do in this final phase is in the service of worship restoration, not just behavior management. So what are the 5 kind of steps if we're giving people next steps? If we're going to be helping children and young adults and young teenagers, we have to do really 5 biblical steps. The first is clarify what must stop. Ephesians 4 talks about putting off and putting on, right? But we got to get pretty specific about what's got to stop. Now you think about the 10-year-old boy who threw his Xbox controller at the wall, right? Who's increasingly getting volatile, right? And the parents are concerned because he's breaking things and, you know what, he's threatening his little brother and, you know, his anger just seems to be big and large, right? He got in trouble in school for bullying, right? You're starting to see a pattern here, right? Okay, so what are the specifics that need to be put off? So naming the behavior clearly and calmly and specifically. Replacing with godly habits, putting off and putting on. It's not enough just to stop bullying other kids. You also need to put on the ability to have appropriate relationships, right? Now, sometimes kids bully because that's what feels safest to them. And they feel like they don't want people to know them, to be close to them. And so that's how they choose to live life dominating others. But prohibition without replacement is incomplete discipleship. Telling the truth involves more than stopping to lie. Get that? Telling the truth requires a greater risk than just simply stopping lying. So we're going to replace with godly habits. We're going to establish accountability. Accountability without relationship is surveillance. Build a web, not a single thread. So is there accountability built in to the opportunity to care for a young person? So we want to establish some sort of accountability. We want to set a review rhythm. Next steps without a review date are good intentions. Put it on the calendar. When's the next time we're going to talk about this? When are we going to check in again? How can I help you move forward in a healthier way, in a way that honors God, in a way that pleases God? Aim at worship restoration. The finish line is not compliance. It's a child whose heart is increasingly oriented towards God. So you think about this at the bottom. And I broke this down into 3 different categories here. There'd be those who are counselors. There's those that are parents. And then there might be those who are teachers or kind of youth workers, right? And I feel like each one has a different set of responsibilities and opportunities. And so some people listening online today might be a counselor. Some people might be a teacher. Some people might be a youth worker. Some people might be a parent. And so I think we have to approach these things slightly differently depending upon what role we have in a child's life. But I think the 5 steps of next steps apply to every single one of us, okay? And so first we clarify what stops, what must stop. And in a counselor, you might help identify a hard issue and a behavior pattern. And here's where it's going to be a little bit different. You might be coaching parents on clear, calm boundaries, ensuring consequences are purposeful and not reactive. Now imagine Ethan's dad says, you know what, I've grounded him for the next year. He's a 10-year-old boy, right? He's grounded for the next year. I sold his Xbox. I'm about to go sell his bike. Right? Next thing he knows, I'm going to sell his bed. That doesn't work. I'm only going to give him 3 outfits. Well, now you're hearing, you're like, hold on, right? The kid threw an Xbox controller, right? At what point is the dad's consequences getting unproductive, right? He was a counselor, be like, okay, like, that's not helping. You're not going to reach the heart of your 10-year-old by selling his bed, right? He might actually like it, right? But you'll be viewed as cruel. He'll interpret that completely differently in the future, right? Now, parent leads, setting specific household boundaries, right? Removing access if necessary. Is it appropriate that the child who breaks the Xbox doesn't have his Xbox for a while? Sure. That's a natural consequence, and natural consequences is the best way to teach, right? You're going to be mowing lawns to earn the money to buy a new Xbox controller. And when you've mowed enough lawns, come back to me with the money, and I'll take you to the GameStop. But we're not, mom and dad are not spending the family's money buying you a replacement Xbox controller that you broke, right? Teachers and youth workers reinforce. Well, teachers and youth workers may have noticed that this boy is angry in all sorts of situations, right? He's bullying in the hallway. He's on the playground, and he's, being rough with people. Well, clearly setting expectations within your space, addressing behavior consistently, communicating patterns to parents when appropriate, right? So clarify what must stop. Replacing with godly habits. Counselors might be assigning structured practice, right? Tie replacement to the heart issue. Parents have an advantage here because they can practice daily rhythms. Parents can check in with kids every single day, right? And that's why equipping parents needs to be something that every church is committed to. Teachers and youth workers reinforce language learned at home and encourage alternative responses in the moment. Affirm visible growth. Having adults in your life who are on your team is a huge advantage. That's why teachers and youth workers and others from the church, aunts and uncles who can affirm growth. Establishing accountability, scheduling follow-ups, maintaining midweek touch points if appropriate, things that counselors can do. Again, parents have the advantage here and accountability of daily visibility and check-ins, asking heart ladder questions regularly, responding to failure with a firmness and grace. Teachers can provide situational feedback, encourage honesty, support, but again, they don't replace parental leadership. A review rhythm, again, you're going to recognize a counselor might be every few weeks you're meeting with somebody, where a parent might have a daily opportunity, a regular review moment. With teenagers, those review moments might come weekly, right? They may come, I'm going to check in with you every week, right? You're not going to be having as much daily correction time with the teenager typically, right? But brief check-ins, how did that strategy work today? Reinforcing consistency, aiming at worship restoration, keeping conversations centered on heart orientation, guard against behavior-only success. It's not just enough to stop blowing up. Ultimately, I want a kid to trust God, right? I want a kid to trust God that, you know what? God put me in this home for my good, that my parents have set wise boundaries for me, that I can trust them. I can trust the boundaries that my parents have set. God put me here. I want parents to trust that, you know what, they don't need to be reactive to every single incident, right? The dad who's about to sell the bed is trusting himself to solve the problem. He's not trusting God. Do you get that? He's like, I came up with the most severe consequence that I could come up with. So I'm just going to punish that kid so he knows he better never do that again. Aim at worship restoration. Shepherd the heart, not just compliance. Connecting discipline to love for God, encouraging identity in Christ. And ultimately, youth workers get the opportunity to reinforce gospel hope in these moments. And so, Lastly, just a couple key reminders here. Does role clarity prevents frustration? Counselors equip, parents implement, teachers reinforce. When each person operates within their lane, the whole system works. When roles blur, everyone becomes less effective and the child pays the cost. So kind of knowing which role you're in, right? And it's going to be different with your own kids versus your friends' kids versus kids in your youth group versus kids you might be having in a counseling office. And again, the context for those listening today is going to be all of those things. And so just kind of know which role that you're in. The context changes the method, not the mission. So correction in the car, a boundary in the classroom, a structured plan in the counseling session, different settings. There's the same goal, but a child whose heart is increasingly trusting God. If a parent and a counselor and a youth pastor and a youth worker and aunts and uncles are all pouring into a child's life, teaching them to walk with God, well, the child has all sorts of influences, right, to help them move forward. And so building a web, not just a single thread. So no single adult carries a discipleship strategy alone. Healthy change happens when parents lead, counselors guide, and ministry leaders reinforce. Alignment requires intentional communication and humility about the role of boundaries. So look at some of the effective steps here. A couple things just when you're thinking about next steps and homeworks for kids. First is just make it smaller than you think it needs to be. Make it smaller than you think it needs to be. The most common mistake in next steps is scope. So a parent leaves a counseling session with 5 action items and he implements none of them. I got 5 things I got to do this week. Well, if you added 5 new things to my schedule for next week, I'd feel overwhelmed, right? If you told me all 5 things I got to do today, right? And so give them 1, maybe 2 things that they can work on. Ask yourself, what is the one thing that if it changes everything else? Tie the step directly to a heart issue, not just behavior. Read your Bible more is not the next step. It's a suggestion. When you feel that the fear of being left out, open to Psalm 27 and read verse 1 aloud before you pick up the phone. Well, that gives a teenager an actionable step. The more specifically you connect the practice to the heart issue that surfaced in conversation, the more likely it is to do actual spiritual work. Make it something they can rehearse, not just resolve. Resolution fades, but rehearsal builds. So the most effective takeaways in practicing a new response or role-playing what to say next time. All the time in my office, I'm asking kids, okay, how could we say that differently? What could we do differently? What would be a strategy that might work better, right? And actually having them practice that in my office. Sometimes I'll have them write that down or draw pictures of it, depending upon the different types of kids that we have and just their ability to communicate. Build in accountability that feels like care, not surveillance. The follow-up structure communicates something. If the review feels like a test, then the child will dread it. If it feels like someone who genuinely wants to know how they're doing, well, then they accept it. Is it somebody who genuinely cares for me? I want to hear how this goes, rather than I'm going to be checking to see if you did your homework, right? I want to hear how this goes for you. I want to know if things are more peaceful in your house next week. If you were able to contribute to that. If you were able to show better self-control. So homework that's effective is concrete, a specific scripture phrase or moment in the day. It's connected, it's tied directly to a hard issue that surface, not generic advice. And ultimately it's carried. It's supported by a trusted child until the truth becomes the child's own. So those are the next steps. So plan, ultimately, is not a checklist. It's a posture. It's the posture of a person who takes children's souls seriously, who believes in the gospel enough to reach even the hardest hearts, and is willing to do the slow, patient, prayerful work of engaging what is real. So when we think about plan, what are we ultimately trying to do? Ephesians 6:4 says, "Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord." Well, training and instruction, right? We're trying to reach the heart of a child. The instruction of the Lord is not behavioral instruction. It is formation. It's showing a child who God is, what he has done, and why that changes everything. And so that's the work that you're doing and it matters more than you know. We started this hour with a 14-year-old boy standing, or a 14-year-old standing in your doorway, saying 6 words. I need to tell you something. That's scary, right? And I need you to remember what that moment feels like, the spike in your chest, the racing thoughts, the split second where your face says something before your mouth does. Here's what I want you to know as we close. That moment in your life is probably coming again, right? Maybe tonight, maybe next week. Maybe it's not a doorway. Maybe it's a car ride home from practice where the silence gets heavy. Maybe it's a text from a teenager in your youth group at 11 o'clock at night who says, can we talk? Maybe it's a 6-year-old melting down for the 4th time this week. And you know, there's something deeper underneath, but you can't get to it. That moment is coming. And when it does, you now have something you didn't have an hour ago. Not a script, not a checklist, but a posture, a plan. You know how to prepare, to stop before you enter, to get your own heart right, to ask whether you're about to shepherd from love or discipline and fear. You know how to listen, really listen. Not to formulate your response, but to hear what's underneath the words. To notice what defiance may be fear, what withdrawal might be shame, what anger might be grief wearing a mask. You know how to ask. To walk down the ladder, one question at a time, from what happened all the way to what they were worshiping in that moment. Not to interrogate, but what are we trying to do? We're trying to help a young person see their heart clearly. Maybe for the first time. And to build next steps, not to just to lecture them. Not to give them a lecture they're going to forget, right? But one concrete, connected, and carried step that ties the gospel to the very place where their heart is hurting. So let me take you back to that doorway. Your 14-year-old says, I need to tell you something. And this time your heart rate still spikes. That part doesn't change, and it shouldn't. It spikes because you love your child. But this time, instead of freezing or overreacting, you take a breath, you sit down, you lower your voice, and you say something that's one of the most powerful things that a kid can hear. I'm here, tell me. I'm here, tell me. It's not a technique. It's the gospel with skin on. It's an adult showing a child what it looks like when someone pursues you into the mess instead of standing at a distance and evaluating it. What a privilege it is to have somebody pursue you into the mess. So many kids are feeling like they're all alone in the mess. And you get the opportunity to pursue kids into the mess. And here's what I need you to believe before you walk out of this room. God has equipped each of us to do this. Not because you have all the answers, you don't, and you won't ever have all the answers. But because you serve a God who does have the answers. You serve a God who gives us what we need in his word. A God who searched David's heart. A God who sat with the woman at the well and asked her questions he already knew the answers to. Not because he needed more information, but because she needed to hear herself say it out loud. That's the God you represent at the kitchen table, in the counseling office, in the hallway after youth group. And God has not left you alone in that moment. Proverbs 20 verse 5 says, the purposes of a man's heart are deep waters, but one who has insight draws them out. You are that person right now. Not because you're perfect, but because you showed up today, because you're willing to do the slow, patient, prayerful work of reaching what is real in a young person's heart. This is what you're doing, and it matters more than you know. God wants us all to have a plan to care for young people in our church, in our life, in our counseling opportunities. And here's my burden this morning. We can organize biblical principles into a plan to help young people recognize and to see how God reaches into their mess and wants to change them and shape them. I'm going to pray for us as we close this session. God, every person in this room is here because they have young people in their life who need them. Some of the young people are scared. Some of the young people are angry. Some of the young people are afraid, guilty, shamed. God, we don't even know where to start sometimes. But God, give us courage to show your heart to them, to act rather than react. God, give us patience to listen. God, give us a curiosity born out of compassion to care for the struggles of young people. God, use us to reach young people in a mighty way. God, as we work through the rest of the sessions today, God, use this time to help us better have conversations, to better prepare for conversations about the things that really matter to young people. God, thank you for the investment that each one of these individuals has made, both here in the room and online. God, use this time for our good. In your name, amen. All righty. We are going to be working through, we're going to take a quick break here, but we're going to be working through some of the children's issues in here.